Thank you everyone for coming. This is incredible to see so many people here. My name is Will Jason. I've lived in Belmont for 9 years, so I still feel like a little bit of a newcomer by Belmont standards. My wife and I have 2 daughters in the public schools, and I am a board member for the Belmont Voice. The idea for this event came from my friend and co-organizer, Prashant Jaloka. Prashant, are you here yet? Hey. He moved to Belmont around the same time as I did, and he pointed out that Belmont is full of fascinating people, but we don't always have time, or at least we don't make time, to hear their stories. And hearing resident stories also fits perfectly with the mission of the Belmont Voice, to produce independent journalism that keeps the community connected, well-informed, and engaged. So that's why we're here tonight. That's the purpose of this event. It's a chance to hear from 2 Belmont residents who both, in their own ways, very different ways, have led unconventional lives. And these 2 remarkable people rejected paths that might have seemed easy or obvious to pursue their passions and improve the world. So we'll get to their stories as soon as possible, but just first, quickly, thank you again to Prashant for helping to make this happen, and to the Belmont Voice Board for their guidance and support, including President Bob Rifkin and Board Chair Sarah Caputo. You're going to hear from Sarah later this evening. Give it up for Sarah. The work that everyone did to stand up this paper, that all preceded me. I had nothing to do with that, so I'm very grateful for everyone who gave us this gift in Belmont. Also, thank you to Jeff Scott and the Belmont Media Center for filming this event so that others can watch it. And finally, thank you to Chris, Rianne, Tracy, and the whole team here at First Church in Belmont for sharing this beautiful space. Okay, so let's get started. First, you're going to hear from Linda Mason, a global humanitarian, author, and co-founder of Bright Horizons, in conversation with Stephanie Leydon, a senior editor and executive producer for GBH. Then we'll have a few minutes of Q&A before we bring up Rick Doblin, one of the nation's leading advocates for research and the therapeutic use of psychedelics. And he'll be in conversation with former journalist and media consultant Greg Stone, and then we'll end with another Q&A. So let's give a warm welcome and welcome to the stage Linda Mason and Stephanie Leydon, please.
Hello. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Will, for the lovely introduction. Thanks all for coming out tonight, and congratulations to the Belmont Voice, about to start year 2. We love to see community journalism. Linda Mason, what an honor to be here with you. Just delightful.
It's an honor to be here, Stephanie. Thank you.
You talk about your life in chapters, which is so much more fun than thinking about 5-year and 10-year plans. And I'd like to start at what I think was a really important chapter for you, one that was really pivotal. You were leaving Yale.
Excuse me, could you speak into the mic?
Oh, sorry. How's that? Better?
Much better.
Okay. Should I start over? Can I start from the pivotal moment? We'll start from pivotal? Okay. Life in chapters. So the chapter I want to start with, Linda, is as you're graduating from Yale, you're getting an MBA, you have a job lined up as a consultant, but instead of going into consulting, you go to Cambodia. Can you talk about what went into that decision and the role it played in the chapters that would follow?
Sure. Well, first of all, I do want to thank all of you for coming out on a gloomy night. And I just so admire Belmont Voice. I think every community should have a newspaper, and I'm just so thrilled. So yeah, it's a little bit of an untraditional path. I had accepted a job with Booz Allen and Hamilton, a management consulting firm. But the last semester at business school was when the Vietnamese invaded Cambodia, ousted the Khmer Rouge, who had been ruling for 4 years, a terrible genocidal period in their country's history. And it was, and hundreds of thousands of Cambodians were fleeing to the border of Thailand, just traumatized from 4 years of under Khmer Rouge. And it was in the newspapers every day. And my father, I grew up in a tiny rural farming village in the Finger Lakes in upstate New York, and my father was a country doctor, and he had taken time off every couple of years to volunteer in Africa and Southeast Asia and Central America. And so I kind of had a little bit of that inspiration in my blood. And I had heard that there were 2 other classmates that had this idea to go work in the refugee camps on the border of Thailand and write some case studies for Yale School of Management. So I called up one of the classmates, Neil Kenny Geyer, and said, you know, it was not a rational decision. You know, many of my big decisions in life are kind of jump and then think about it. You know, it wasn't really well thought out. I just felt very moved by this crisis and just felt like I wanted to be there. Maybe I was also not so sure I wanted to be a management consultant. And so I called up this classmate and said, you know, I'd love to join up with you. And he said, sure, come on over. And there were 3 of us. And the other classmate was Roger Brown, who 7 years later became my husband. He's here somewhere. And we put together this, you know, idea to get a job working for an NGO on the border and writing some case studies. And we arrived right after graduation and started working in the camps. And 10 days after we arrived, the Vietnamese shelled the camps, and it turned into a very violent area. And so the needs were even greater. So we felt very compelled to stay longer than the summer, so we stayed for a year. And I think that just transformed my life and my direction, and just, kind of really made me who I was, who I became.
And you stayed overseas with Roger. Your next stop was the Sudan?
Yeah, so I did come back and work in management consulting for a few years, but my heart was really in the work overseas. And same with Roger. He was also a management consultant. And so when the African famine broke out in the mid-'80s, Save the Children had raised a lot of money for African relief, but had no program on the ground. So we're looking for people to start up a program. That was the era of We Are the World. For those of us my age may remember that. That was a big public effort to raise money. And so, you know, actually, it was sort of a strange moment where we were at another friend's house for New Year's Eve, and this friend, but Roger and I were working, management consulting, working 70 hours a week, flying all over the place, writing reports that probably clients just shelved and didn't really look at. And this friend said, let's just think about the year that just passed, because it's going to be a new year, and let's talk about what it meant to us. And as Roger and I sat there and thought about our year, we kind of got depressed, you know, that, and that was also when the band Talking Heads had this amazing song, you may find yourself in a beautiful home with a beautiful wife, and you may ask yourself, how did I get here, letting the days go by? And that spoke to us, and we said, we need to make a change. And we kind of stayed up half the night. We were real downers for the rest of the party, because we were kind of very blue. And we just made a commitment to each other that we were going to make a change. And we weren't sure what that change was going to be. And, you know, I have a little bit of a philosophy that if you make an intention and you just keep yourself open to the universe and are aware of, you become more aware of opportunities that you may miss. And actually, a few weeks later, we had actually written a book together about the management of relief. So we were a little bit known. I mean, it's like hardly anyone's bought the book, but we were a little bit known in the relief world. And the head of Save the Children called us and said, we're looking for a team to start a program. And we went down to New York and met with David Geyer, and he painted the scene of devastation, of famine and war also between Eritrea and Ethiopia. And he said, I'm looking for a team to get a program started, and I need to know tomorrow, because if you can't do it, I need to find someone else quickly. So we walked out, and we looked at each other, and we just said, we're going. And so then we spent a few years in the Sudan as well.
Amazing. What was the intention? You said you believe you make the intention. Yeah.
To find a path that had more of a sense of purpose and of service, really. Yeah.
Is there a through line from your time Cambodia, then Sudan, and working in partnership with your husband and working amid great uncertainty? Is there a through line from that to your work founding Bright Horizons?
Yeah, and by the way, where is Roger? Roger, where are you? Yeah, way in the back. So he's my partner in everything. And by the way, we actually went to the Sudan as co-country directors, not married. And because we thought it's very bourgeois to get married. We don't really need to be married. We can be life partners without that. And so Sudan is a very conservative Sharia law country. And so I think everyone assumed we were married, but took years more before we actually decided, well, maybe getting married makes sense. But yeah, so Sudan turned out to be very entrepreneurial. So Save the Children had raised $2 million for African relief, and we went with those funds, and then spent some time traveling around the country, meeting with the UN and USAID, and seeing where the needs were, where the gaps were, raising more money, and coming up with a plan to fill in some of these gaps. And had to move very quickly because it was a crisis. There was a massive famine in northern Sudan, and there were tens of thousands of Eritrean refugees that were fleeing into Sudan because of the war. And so we came up with a plan and a mission, and we raised another $15 million and just had to move very quickly. There was a cholera outbreak 2 months after we arrived. And so we moved fast, and we built a national organization with serving about 400,000 people across the country. There were two sort of interesting little twists during that time there. We arrived, as I said earlier, my father, as a doctor, would take time off to volunteer. And prior to us accepting the job, he had already put aside some time in his practice and was planning to go to Afghanistan. But then when we were posted in the Sudan, he said, I'd like to go there. We said, sure. And my mother said, I'll go too. So they arrived, and about 5 days after they arrived, there was a coup in the Sudan, and the borders were closed. And so none of our staff could get in, and my parents couldn't get out. And so I set up my father, and we were running a refugee camp of 20,000 refugees. I set my father up in the refugee camp. We found some Eritreans who were nurses and had some medical background who worked with them, found a person who spoke English, set my mother up in Khartoum to set up our office systems and put them to work. And they were our staff for the first several weeks until the border opened and we got other folks in. So that was the last overseas experience my father ever did. I think that it's a desert area. The other little story I just can't resist telling. So this was the era of We Are the World, and with Michael Jackson and Harry Belafonte and Quincy Jones. Well, Harry Belafonte came to the Sudan to give us a check, and came out to the refugee camp where I was working, and said, just ignore me. I'm going to follow you all day to see what you do, because I really want to know what's going on. and just don't pay any attention. So it's very hard not to pay attention to Harry Belafonte. And we had, a really meaningful day. And a few decades later, there was a documentary that came out about him, and we were able to go to a viewing in the vineyard where he was there. Now he's at that point, 90. And I managed to get backstage. I said, Mr. Belafonte, I'm the person you spent that day with in the Sudan. And he had no recollection. It was sort of a life-changing moment for me, and he didn't remember. But anyway, back to your question, is there a through line? So most of our work overseas was with young children, since they're the most affected by war and famine and dislocation. And we saw both the great needs, they're the neediest population, and also the most resilient. That if you could intervene in those early years, you could really make a difference in the direction of that life. So we told Save the Children we would stay until the first good harvest. We returned back to the States. We had each left our consulting jobs, and we weren't sure what we were going to do next. And this is pre-internet, so we hadn't done anything to kind of plan, pre-cell phones. And so we kind of wandered about. We were living in a little house in Cambridgeport, and we sort of were amazed. We had lived in this desert area for 2 years, always all shades of gray and brown. And now we were in lush New England, and we just wandered the parks with a pad of paper and pen in hand, and kind of just started dreaming, because we were bit by the entrepreneurial bug. We loved the work that we did in the Sudan. We loved the Sudanese people and the Sudanese culture. And we loved having the opportunity to have an idea and create an organization around it with a mission and a set of values, and build it to scale with something that had service. So we said, okay, let's start something of our own here in the States, in our own country. And at that point, so this is now the late 80s, and really, as we started looking around in the children's field, we realized that our country was going through a major sociological revolution of mothers of young children entering the workforce. And just that, something like 65% of all mothers under 5 were now working, whereas the generation before was about 15%. So a huge demand for childcare. And then we started looking at the supply of childcare, and there wasn't enough of it. And much of what existed was poor to mediocre quality. And we felt that this was a national tragedy, that most of our nation's children were in childcare, and much of it was suboptimal. So, and when we looked at why is it suboptimal, well, because the unit economics don't work. And so we felt if this is an issue, if demand is going up because mothers are working, maybe this needs to be an employer issue, and employers could subsidize. So we came up with the idea of Bright Horizons, which is high-quality childcare at the work site, supported by the employer. And that was the model.
I think it's hard to imagine a world without Bright Horizons. It's so ubiquitous at this point. And to think about what the landscape was like then, right? Even less childcare than we have now, still don't have enough.
Yeah.
What was how was that received? Like this idea, okay, not only are we going to start childcare, and was the idea to do it to scale? That was
yes,
we were. Beginning?
Yeah, we were very ambitious. How was it received?
How was it received, especially this idea of making it a workplace childcare?
It was not. It was a bomb. We thought we were brilliant. Women are working. They need childcare. Employers need women to work. So of course, employers are going to be super excited about this idea. And so we would go pitching this idea to corporations, and they looked at us as these flaky Peace Corps types that just didn't understand business. And really, so it was a very, very hard sell. We set up shop. We had a small house in Cambridgeport. We set up shop in our small house there, turned every room into workspace. And we felt there was really sort of what we realized, there was a lag in the shift in employee demographics and the realization on the part of senior management that this is an issue. And as we started doing research, we found a few really important pieces of data that 2/3 of the women in the workforce were women of childbearing years. The highest source of turnover, people leaving, are people leaving because they can't find childcare. But it often took having a very important vice president quit because she couldn't find childcare for a CEO to realize this is an employer issue. And so we struggled for the first several years. But once our first center was for the Prudential in Back Bay, and Prudential did a lot of publicity around it, and that really got us launched.
And there was, since this is a Belmont event, there was another prominent person with Belmont connections who was part of the growth of Bright Horizons. Talk
Yes,
about
yes.
Mitt Romney before he was governor.
Yes, yes. So Mitt Romney had just started Bain Capital, and they were at this point investing in startups. And Roger had, before we went to the Sudan, worked for Bain and Company. So he actually, Mitt was his boss when he was there. So we took the idea to him. I have to give him a lot of credit because here we are, and we're still unmarried, an unmarried couple creating childcare, which, maybe he mainly felt maybe women should be at home taking care of their children. But he loved the idea. He just saw the need and saw that it had to happen. So it wouldn't have happened without Mitt investing early on.
You, as you said, you eventually got married, you eventually had children
Yeah.
as you were growing the business. I'm curious for you, in your children used Bright Horizons. You took advantage
yeah.
of your company to help care for your children. What was it like for you as the founder of this daycare company and as a new mother with that first child and that first drop-off?
Yeah, well, so we had our first child, Farrell, 2 years after we started Bright Horizons. So at that point, we were still very small. And I had interviewed every teacher in the center. I had personally hired the center director. It was right underneath our office. And it was so painful because I first took a maternity leave. And then Roger took a paternity leave. So it was first really painful for me to go back to work. But at least Farrell was with Roger. For Roger, he was the one who had to bring Farrell to childcare first. Roger could not leave her. He would bring her after his paternity leave, and he would start bringing her to childcare. He would just stay in the center, and the teachers would say, "Roger, I think Farrell's doing okay. Why don't you go get a cup of coffee?" And he would say, "I don't drink coffee," and then finally they kicked him out. And she was great. But it's really, really hard, even if it's your center and you know every teacher and you know your baby is getting great care. It's so hard. But, all three of our kids were right downstairs getting great care and are proud graduates of Bright Horizons.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
You went on to write a book based, I assume, on your experience and women you interviewed. I think it's the Working Women's Guide to Life. Do I have it right?
Working Mother's Guide to Life.
Mother's
very,
Guide to
very
Life.
modest title, yeah.
I assume we have some working mothers. I'm going to say all mothers are working mothers.
Yeah.
So what's a takeaway? Kind of point us in the right direction.
Sure. So, I've always felt guilty being a working mom. Always felt guilty. I felt guilty when I was at work, even though I knew my baby was getting great care right below. And then I was guilty at home when, we're trying to build this organization. And it's just, raising a family and building a business requires so much mental and emotional and time. And so it was just so hard doing both. And I just always felt guilty. But as I would visit our centers, I would marvel at mothers who seemed to have it all together, you know, and I always seemed harried, and I always had spit up on my jacket, and I marveled at the moms who didn't feel that way. And you know, our centers, we called them new neighborhoods, so we did a lot so parents could get to know each other in the center. And as I got to know many of the mothers, they didn't all feel the way I did. And so I thought, what are their strategies? What are their secrets? How are they able to work out of the house and be a mother and do both well? And so it was really out of my own kind of need and drive that I decided I want to interview moms. So I interviewed 100 mothers. So at this point, we've had 3 children. So at this point, our organization is quite large and national. And I had our parent advocates across the country choose women who they felt were really thriving and their children were thriving. And I spent a year interviewing 100 mothers from all different backgrounds, you know, married, single, divorced, CEOs down to orderlies in hospitals. So all different lifestyles. And really, kind of, I have a little bit of a voyeur part of me where I love to like get inside people's lives and just learn so much. And what I found after interviewing 100 mothers, that they're very, very different styles of effective parenting, that there's not one right way. I was always feeling bad because I wasn't doing everything that my friend Mary was doing, or my friend Jay was doing, or my friend Sally was doing. And I found that there were very different styles of mothering that were very effective. And so that was the first thing I learned, that to find your own style, your own way, and to embrace it. So I kind of had categories. There was the strategic planner mom, the earth mom, the passionate spirit mom. And so that was very liberating to see that there's not one right way. And then I found, even though these mothers were all very different, they all had 3 things in common. And I called these the 3 pillars of successful working motherhood. And that's a partner in parenting, whether that's your spouse, your mother, your sister, you know, a neighborhood, so that you're sharing both the joys and the challenges of parenting, and you're not carrying that burden alone. The second was to have a supportive employer. So you could be working for a wonderful organization, but if your boss isn't supportive, then your life is miserable. And the third is to have high-quality childcare, whether it's a nanny, a relative, a family childcare home, or a licensed childcare center. So those became the 3 pillars.
Excellent advice and an excellent perspective. I think we just have time for maybe one more question up here, and then we'll have an opportunity for people to ask questions of Linda. So maybe we can wrap, speaking of community, talk a little bit about Belmont. You were in Cambridge when you started Bright Horizons. You landed here. Why Belmont, and why have you stayed?
Yeah, so we were in a very small place in Cambridge with no yard. And when we had our first child, Farrell, we thought, well, looking ahead, we want to be in a place where there's a little bit more space. And we had a very close friend, an older couple who had raised their children in Belmont. And honestly, it was early on in Bright Horizons. I didn't have time, neither one of us had a lot of time to really look around at different towns or look around at different houses. And so this friend, Charlotte Sorensen, took us to Belmont, where she raised her kids, and saw this house that was for sale and said, Linda, this is just the house you two have to buy. And I said, okay, good, okay. And we bought it. And I tell you, so now that our oldest child, our first child was just 9 months old when we moved here, She's now 37. Our son is 35, and our youngest is 29. And this sense of community here has just been so central to our life. You know, the friends that we made when Farrell, our oldest, started kindergarten, we made a whole group of friends who are today still our best friends, 35 years later, 32 years later. And we belong to this church. This church is an amazing community. And the school system, Winbrook was like this little family. And I was telling Stephanie before we came up here that I was with my third child. I was on pregnancy bed rest for 4 months. And this church organized dinners, Winbrook parents organized dinners, our neighbors organized dinners. We had a dinner delivered every night, 4 months of lasagna. It was just, and it's just, every day I go for walks with my girlfriends up in Habitat. It's just, it's a wonderful sense of community here.
I'll second that.
Yeah.
Linda Mason,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Thank you,
Really lovely to
Stephanie.
speak with
Thank you.
If you have questions, I think you could just put your hand up. Will is here with a microphone and can come find you, and we can take a few questions.
Hi, Linda. Thank you so much. What would you say to all the workers who have been the dismantling of USAID and how that's impacting those workers and what's happening in the world for all the relief that isn't taking place?
Thank you for asking that question, Jeannie. So one chapter that I left out, I'm kind of old, so I've had a lot of chapters. After 17 years at Bright Horizons, Roger and I each moved on to other things. Roger went over to Berklee College of Music, and I went back into the humanitarian field and spent 20 years with Mercy Corps, which is an NGO that works in what we call the world's toughest places, so places in conflict and war and economic disaster. The elimination of USAID is just absolutely catastrophic. And it's USAID funding is 1% of the national budget. It's nothing, and it has bipartisan support. It is callous and tragic, and will come back not only to hurt many people, millions of people around the world, but will hurt us too. We've been a beacon of hope all around the world, and it's just been totally decimated. It makes me sick to think about many of the communities that I worked in. We did a lot of work in Gaza and West Bank, and I've been in Gaza maybe 9 times. We set up this tech incubator in Gaza that was flourishing. I was very close to several families there that I have no idea if they're alive or not. It's just, I mean, that's a different issue than USAID, but I'm so shocked that Congress let that happen.
Thank you, Linda. Yeah. And I imagine you also know people, right, who've been affected.
So many
workers,
friends,
so
yes,
it touches you so
absolutely.
personally.
As my question is more personal, I'm moved by what you said about motherhood, and I wonder how and if your experience in Asia and Africa changed the way you raise your kids.
Say the last part of the question again.
How your experience in Asia and Africa changed the way you raise your kids.
I love that question. Okay, yes. Looking at child rearing. I was so fascinated by child rearing practices around the world. So we lived in this little village in Sudan, Umurwaba, and desperately, desperately poor. And going through a terrible famine, and just seeing how the community naturally and traditionally operated, which was a sense of community. You know this phrase, it takes a village to raise a child, that we experience so deeply in these small villages in Africa and Southeast Asia. And it's this sense of community and extended family, which may not be relatives, but extended family. And when we started a family, this sense of community was one of our central values. And we very intentionally created a community of very close friends that help each other out all the time. You know, do any of you remember Barry Brazelton, the early childhood? Yeah. So Barry Brazelton, this wonderful pediatrician and child development specialist, was on our advisory board, and he said this wonderful statement: "Children, unlike adults, thrive on multiple lovers," and I think it's so true. You know, if a child has parents who love them, relatives who love them, neighbors who love them, that child grows up with a sense of safety in the world, that there are people who are out there who are loving and look out for them. Also, you know, I'm not sure if we did the second part of it. You know, in most communities throughout Africa and Asia, children are like, they're working alongside the parents. And we tried to get our kids to be more like that. I'm not sure if we really worked, but yeah.
That's the next book.
Yeah.
Is there another question out there?
Thank you so much to both of you for the excellent questions and your wonderful answers, and thank you, Linda, for all the gifts that you've given the world. It's just been terrific. My question is, you know, coming from, upper middle class background in the United States, can you comment on how you learned to plug in effectively into cultures that are so different from our own cultures, to learn how to work effectively with those very different cultures?
Yeah, I think my parents modeled that. You know, my parents were very idealistic. My father, you know, went to Swarthmore and Penn Medical School, was in the top 5 of his class, and he chose to go to a part of the country that was very underserved medically. And rural, way upstate New York and the Finger Lakes area is a very, it's really a poor area of the state, very small, struggling family dairy farms. And, my father did house calls until the day he retired, often wasn't paid, was paid in, a side of beef or whatever. My mother, it's a tiny little rural village. My mother worked very hard in the village, became the mayor of our little village. And and I think, as I said before, my father worked overseas. So I think they were just wonderful, wonderful role models of humility and service. And, I've always felt in the environment that I'm in, every person has the same precious value, whether it's a grandma in a refugee camp who's living in a hut, or the prime minister that I have to meet with and negotiate an agreement. I treat them all, I approach people all the same, or at least try to. I think that's a good question.
And a good way to conduct yourself throughout the world, for sure.
We have time for one more question, if anyone has one. Okay.
I have one. One I didn't get to. Can I ask one more? I don't have data behind this, but my feeling, from my own anecdotal experience, is young people today are perhaps less likely to go with what their heart wants, or to go on the whim, or to say, I'm going to go to Cambodia. I'm moved. I want to try that. There seems to be more pressure to get on a track, figure things out faster. I wonder if you sense that, and more importantly, I just wonder if you have advice that you've either given perhaps your own children or other young people about, those first chapters, that launch.
Sure. Yeah. So I always like to talk to young people to think of their life in chapters. It's very hard, graduating from college, to know what your life passion is. And I think follow your passion is an easy thing to say, but a hard thing to figure out. And so I always try to help young people to take that pressure off and to think of, find the first chapter. And often it has to be whatever you could do to earn money, and very practical. But when you're in that first chapter, I always say work very hard so you do a really good job, and keep your eyes open for the next opportunity, and have a North Star of where you would like to go. And know that it's like, kayaking down a wild river. You may not go in a straight line, but if you keep that North Star of where you want to go, you may need to have a chapter where you're just working to pay off your college debt. But then you may have another chapter where you can do something that's more soul-filling. And I think particularly for mothers, we think of our lives in chapters when we're having children and having to gear up and gear back again. And so I try to help young people to take that pressure off, to get it all figured out.
So much wonderful advice and really amazing stories and perspectives. Linda Mason, thank you so much.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Linda and Stephanie. That was fantastic. All right, so I'd like to welcome to the stage Rick Doblin and Greg Stone.
Well, good evening, everybody. I promised to try to move the microphone as I move, and I told Rick to do the same thing. So my first question to you is, you've said that psychedelics are a way to strengthen the well and heal the sick. Tell us more about that, please.
Yeah, I would say that there's two parts of this idea. One part about helping the sick, that's the way through the FDA, through drug development. That's politically what we need to do. There's so much enormous misunderstandings and fear-based propaganda to justify the war on drugs. So the way into society to really take advantage of the incredible potentials that psychedelics, well used, can offer is through medicine. But the other part of it is through, as you say, either helping the well or thinking about it as preventative medicine. And also for rites of passage, for people at all stages of their lives. So MAPS, the nonprofit that I started, has always had these parallel paths. One is to work through the FDA, and the other is to do drug policy reform. So psychedelics have been used for thousands of years, and they've been suppressed for much of the history of humanity, but they've never really gone away. And in some cultures, they're the core to their culture, the center of the religious use, so that they can both help you connect to something deeper than yourself, to something that goes beyond your sense of ego, and they can also help you to experience joy, experience celebration, so that they're tools that can be used in many, many different ways. And in the past, there was this combination, you could say, of spirituality and healing. Now we've kind of separated spirituality and healing. But they bring you to new perspectives. Psychedelics can impact what doctors over at McLean and others talk about rumination. So they can impact these kind of patterns of thought in a way that make you see things in a new way. And that can be both healing of illness, and it can also be for artistic creativity, for spirituality. So it's not that surprising. I think what we really need to think about is how do we take advantage of the potentials of psychedelics and think of them not just as either medical tools or spiritual tools, but tools that can be used throughout the lifetime. I'll just share one idea of, I just came back from Israel, came back on Monday, and there was research about people at the Nova Rave that was attacked by Hamas on October 7th. There was about 4,000 people, about 360 murdered, 120 or so abducted. And most of the people were high on drugs when the attack happened. And so there's been studies around 550 of the survivors of, and they've separated them, those who were on MDMA, those who were on LSD or psilocybin, or those who were on nothing. And so what they, and people at these raves, they tend to time their drug use for the sunset. Oh, excuse me, the sunrise. So that's like the peak of the trip. That's also when the attack happened. What they showed is that those people that were on MDMA when the attack happened had fewer PTSD symptoms later than those people that were on LSD or psilocybin or were on nothing. So there's this aspect of psychedelics here used for celebration, but then when some horribly traumatic incident happens, they can be protective, or at least the MDMA was protective because you're kind of processing the trauma. So that was an example of psychedelics that were both for well people, but then became useful in the healing process. And now a lot of the people in Israel are seeking out support. It doesn't mean that they didn't have PTSD or didn't have terrible symptoms, so that Israel is now one of the leading countries in the world for looking at the beneficial therapeutic potentials of psychedelics. So I think the main way to answer your question is to just think they're tools. These are tools. They're not inherently good. They're not inherently bad. They're not inherently therapeutic, but they can be used in all sorts of different contexts.
Now, you have said that psychedelics are a cure for fundamentalism. What does that mean?
Well, it means that a lot of, I would say the essence of sort of fundamentalism is a literalism. Kind of a, you know, there's only one right way, and it's this exact way, and it becomes about the rules and the laws, and it's not as ecumenical, you could say. I mean, here we are in a UU church.
Well, can I just say one thing about that? There are different types of fundamentalism. My son, for instance, when he was a little boy, was a Star Wars fundamentalist. And, you know, when Lucas sold it to Disney, he was horrified. He said, "Dad, it's going to ruin the canon." So anyway, there are also Melville fundamentalists and Shakespearean fundamentalists and so on. But what do you mean by that?
By fundamentalists, I mean rigid thinkers who are not people that are deeply involved in something, but people who are deeply involved in something that they think then that makes them, that they're on the right path and everybody else is on the wrong path. And so when I say that psychedelics are the antidote to fundamentalism, they move people into a more direct experience of kind of spiritual topics in a way that you are understanding that this is sort of core humanity and it's not limited to one religion or another. So Aldous Huxley talked about the perennial philosophy. You know, this understanding about how, you know, we're part of something much larger than ourselves, and that you can end up seeing that, here's another way to say it, I guess, is that we all have language. We all use language to speak to each other. It comes from the same kind of energy, but all the different languages. We don't say Russian is better than German is better than French. These are just different kind of languages. So I think the move from fundamentalism to more universalism is to see religions like languages. They're about how do we cope with the meaning and purpose of life? How do we cope with death? How do we cope with you know, living on a globe with all sorts of different people? That this kind of shift to not needing to think that you've got the one right way and the best way. And I think that psychedelics help to deconstruct literalism into more profound experiences that are more universal in a way, the human confrontation with death, things like that. So, but this idea came to me also in 1983. There was a book by the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, Robert Mueller, and it was called New Genesis, Shaping a Global Spirituality. And this book was, he was a French resistance fighter. His previous book was What War Taught Me About Peace, and then he's the Assistant Secretary General of the UN. And the book is about that we have the UN to mediate conflicts between nations, but a lot of these conflicts are religious-based. And so he posited that we need to move from this kind of fundamentalism to this global spirituality, which he had a picture of the Earth from space taken by one of the astronauts that was trying to illustrate this idea. So global spirituality doesn't mean one world religion. It just means that we see our religion as a way to express certain universal truths and issues, and that we can appreciate other people's religions. They come from a different cultural context. Languages are different than each other. Religions are different than each other. But this idea of going from sort of imparted knowledge to experiential, direct kind of senses of being part of something larger, that's the shift, I think. And so I think humanity as a whole is now, we're looking at you know, the internet, we're looking at global warming. We need to be thinking about solving problems on a global basis, that one country alone cannot solve global warming, or one country cannot deal with you know, AI, or can deal with nuclear weapons. We need more global thinking, and so I think this rigidity, most of the conflicts in the world, I'd say these days, are different fundamentalists going after other people that are different from them. And so what I really want to emphasize, that it's the context that you take the psychedelics in that matters more than the drug itself. It's not like, here's a pill and now you're going to have these experiences. It's about the relationship we have with it, and it's about the context. So I think I did have a bit of, when I look back on how I decided to really focus my life on psychedelics, it was when I was 18 years old. It was 1972. I had had this very disappointing bar mitzvah that I had thought that it was going to turn me into a man. I was the oldest of 4 kids, and I remember waking up the next morning after my bar mitzvah, and I'm like, I'm the same. I mean, this is not good. And I was 13, and I just thought, okay, God's busy. Tomorrow something will come. And then the next day, nothing happened. And then I'm like, okay, a lot of people must have got bar mitzvah. You know, finally a week goes by, and there's a whole nother crop of people that got bar mitzvah, and I figured nothing was going to happen to me. When I was 17 and I took LSD, I was like, this is what my bar mitzvah should have been. You know?
Okay. Well,
you know, but who am I? Where do I fit in? What is this kind of? So I think that those kind of inner challenges that you don't get from the books. You get it from your experience, and that leads you, if you go deep enough, to be more universal. I also grew up in Chicago, right next to the Baha'i Temple. It's one of the most beautiful Baha'i temples in the world. There is one in Haifa, but this is sort of the spiritual side of the Muslim religion in some ways, similar to Sufis in some ways, similar to UUs, you know, that it's not one prophet only. You could see they all have different kind of messages. So I think it's that shift to feeling comfortable enough in what you're believing in that you don't need to say, I've got the answer and nobody else does. And that's the shift from fundamentalism to more deeper spirituality.
I have to tell you that you're a very easy interview because I ask a simple question and you just run with it, which is fantastic.
A bunch of questions too.
Well, I think I got through 1.5 so far. But one of the things that you told me when we spoke earlier is that you see yourself as a therapist for the culture. And I think those of us who have listened so far can see how he fits totally into that role. What does that mean? How do you think you can change the culture through psychedelics or not?
Yeah. Well, I'll start by saying that when I turned out 18, and when I decided that I wanted to become a psychedelic therapist, the vision that I had was a therapist treating people one by one, or potentially working with small groups or something like that. But it was really to be therapist. And so my goal was at age 18. Now this is 1972. The backlash against the psychedelics has taken place. The research is shut down all over the world. For decades and decades, the research was shut down, and I thought, okay, I can get a clinical psych PhD. That's what I want to do, and I'll do psychotherapy outcome research, and I'll figure out how to justify making psychedelics into a medicines. So I did take a bunch of LSD and drop out of college for 10 years in my first semester.
Hold on. I think we need more details about that, please.
Okay. Well, we heard before about wonderful parents, so I think I want to share about my wonderful parents. And the best way for me to explain about how wonderful they were is that in the middle of my freshman year, after I started doing a lot of LSD and mescaline and psilocybin, I realized that I was unbalanced, that I was overdeveloped in my mind and underdeveloped in my emotions and spirituality.
Hold on 1 second. Were you unbalanced because of the psychedelics or just in general?
No, just in general. And I think the world is like this. Our brilliant minds have exceeded our capacity to deal with the technology. So E.O. Wilson said that the real problem with humanity is that we have Paleolithic emotions with medieval institutions with godlike technology. So I called my parents and I said, I'm unbalanced. The LSD is really interesting to me. I want to drop out of college. I want to study LSD. And I want you guys to pay for it. It took a while, but eventually they did. They said they would. And so this goal was to become this individual therapist. So I finally graduated in 1987. MDMA was criminalized in 1985. I started MAPS in 1986 to bring it back through the FDA.
Excuse me, let's talk about MAPS for a second.
Okay.
Go ahead, but
we'll just talk about what it means, therapist for the culture, and then talk about MAPS. So just that I realized that the politics was blocking the science, and therefore, since I couldn't do the science, I needed to do the politics. So that's where I came to the Kennedy School. And then what I thought I was really doing is therapy for the culture. And so what that means is that cultures, the politics is downstream of culture. You really need to change the culture to permit the science, so that I had to work symbolically, for example. So one of the most important things about building this psychedelic renaissance was to look at those things where the culture was the most frightened. And so one of them was LSD and Timothy Leary. So starting research at Harvard...
Excuse me, Timothy Leary's dead. Those of us of a certain age know what I'm talking about, right? The Moody Blues, remember that song? Yeah. But go ahead.
He is dead, but his legacy lives on. And so, symbolically starting research at Harvard was key to telling a story to the culture that we were starting a new chapter, you could say. We had to start research with LSD. That was something we managed to do in Switzerland for LSD for people with life-threatening illnesses. We had to have sympathetic patients. So I like to say that with MAPS, which is a nonprofit psychedelic pharma company, that we didn't just do science, we did political science. So we had to choose which drug, which patients, how we could tell a story to the culture to change this fear to hope. And so one of the big ways, and when you look around today, almost everything is part of the culture wars, except for psychedelics. It's one of the few things. So we were able to get bipartisan support for psychedelics. We even have great opportunities under the Trump administration, shockingly, but it was because of work with veterans. So veterans are sympathetic patients. They have the respect and the support of American culture and politicians. And so the media then has been really promoting this idea that we've done a lot of work with veterans with PTSD. According to the Veterans Administration, there's 13 million PTSD patients in America. Most of them are women from sexual abuse. But you do not hear that in the media as much, and that's not what gets you the bipartisan support. It's the work with the veterans. So by psychotherapy for the culture, what I mean is that we have to look at where the fears are, where the sort of general consensus is, and then try to reclaim or revise in certain ways in order to permit the research to get back to sort of being psychotherapy for individuals.
Now, you mentioned that one of the veterans in the program who was dealing with ecstasy, I believe, for therapeutic reasons, said they shouldn't call it ecstasy because his experience was horrible going through this. Have you seen a lot of that with people?
Well, I want to sort of clarify what we just said by horrible. So MDMA, methylene doxymethamphetamine, was a therapy drug from the middle 70s. It was legal. It was used about 500,000 doses. And some of the people that used it in this legal context thought, aha, this is something that more people should have. I could make a lot of money. It's still legal. And it started to be used in party settings as ecstasy. And then that's what attracted the attention of the police. And then when I learned about it, it was 1982 when it was still legal. And so I realized that I had woken up to the value of LSD in 1972 after the backlash. Now I was waking up to the value of MDMA before the backlash so that I could get involved politically. So this became the first nonprofit I had before MAPS was preparing to sue the DEA once they moved to criminalize MDMA. So this concept that there are, it's about the context. So the veteran that said, he said, I don't know why they call this ecstasy. It was because ecstasy reduces activity in the amygdala, our fear processing part of the brain. We can process difficult emotions in ways that previously we've been unable to do that. And so his experience was not horrible, it was just difficult. So you could say it's similar when we're grieving for somebody that we love that has died and you're crying. It's painful, but it's not horrible in that sense. So he just meant that so many people think about ecstasy as a party drug, and for him it was the opposite of a party, but it was what got him healthy. To take these emotions that he'd been overwhelmed by, that he couldn't really process, that he suppressed, to let them out, and to feel that, and to do the therapy in a safe context, to be shaking, to be crying, to just experiencing things that were previously unable for him to achieve. Now, this gets into using it as a medicine. Other people can indeed use MDMA or ecstasy as a party, and they don't necessarily get into these traumatic situations. But I'll share, there was one this is now about 20 years ago, and two women contacted us, both with similar stories, but different outcomes. Both of them had taken ecstasy at a party and had remembered sexual abuse. And one of them said that she was with a bunch of friends, and she knew they just wanted to party, that they wouldn't want to talk about this more difficult stuff. And so she suppressed her emotions, and she felt worse off for months afterwards. So she had sort of a balance. Out comes this memory of this earlier trauma, and instead of processing it, she tried to squelch it. The other woman said that she was at this party doing ecstasy at a rave with a girlfriend, and prior sexual abuse memories came up. They went off into the corner, they talked about it, she processed the emotions, and then she was able to go back to the party. And she thought, oh, ecstasy can be great for PTSD. I think I've discovered something. And she did a Google search and saw we were researching it. So again, it's the context that really makes the outcome. It's not just the substance itself.
You know, we talked about this a little bit, that I had a bad experience with a fever when I was about 14 and I was hallucinating. And so I stayed as far away from psychedelics as I possibly could. But a lot of my friends in college had bad experiences with acid in particular. And one of them had a great analogy. He said that psychedelics are like if your being is a ship, psychedelics are like a strong wind. If you're becoming depressed, that wind is going to push you deeper into depression. If you're elated, the wind will push you into a higher state of elation. Does that make sense to you?
Not really.
So much for my friend.
No, I mean, in a way he's right, but what this idea is that when things start getting difficult, that's bad, and you need to avoid it, and you need to go somewhere else, and you need to take it so that we work with people that are depressed, that are suicidal, that are OCD, that are at death's door. We work with people that are not, you would say, a stranger to difficult emotions, and they're in difficult places. And when you give a psychedelic in a therapeutic context with support, the difficult emotions come out. One of our main sayings is difficult is not the same as bad. So I think when your friend is doing this as kind of a party, or just personal growth, but it's like, you got to make sure you're in a good mood when you do it so that you have a good experience. The essence of the approach to a therapeutic setting, you hear people talk all the time about you set your intentions and you do all this stuff about you setting your intentions. Well, right before you take a psychedelic, you should rip up all of your intentions and just throw them away. And then you're open to whatever comes. And that's this inner wisdom. So that whether it's difficult or whether it's blissful, you deal with what comes. So I think that there is this fear by people who are not therapeutically oriented that we want to take these drugs to have fun. And if it's ending up drifting, or you have to be... I'd say one of the main reasons to take psychedelics is if you're in a bad mood, but in a supportive therapeutic context.
What does that mean? Does that mean you have a medical person next to you holding your hand, metaphorically or literally, that you're in a comfortable place? I mean, you don't want to go into Times Square and do this, right?
Yeah. Well, in a therapeutic setting, yeah, you wouldn't do that. Well, I would also add, though, that one of our main fundraisers was gay, or is gay, and during the 80s, friends were dying of AIDS right and left. And what he said is that they worked out their grief on the dance floor with ecstasy. Wow. So that there can be group settings that give you support. Communal mourning and celebration in the face of death is something that you can better do in a group in some ways. So what I think it means is not so much a medical person. These drugs are more relatively safe physically, but they're psychologically of concern. So sure. You could have peer support. You could have friends, like this woman that went off into the corner with her girlfriend and talked about it. You need to feel safe. You need to feel trusted. The thing about therapy outcome research, which I did get to study some, is that the most important factor in psychotherapy as to whether somebody gets better is not the kind of therapy. It's the therapeutic alliance. It's the trust between the patient and the therapist. They feel safe. So that you can have a friend that you feel safe with, that you can explore difficult emotions. In the future, we need to train children as they're growing up, honest drug education, and I think a big part of it will be peer support. How do you help each other work through these issues if you do want to explore psychedelics?
The question comes to mind, did you have any bad trips, so-called? Were there experiences for you? And we have just a few minutes left before we open it up to questions, but was anything traumatic for you in your experience with psychedelics?
Yeah, well, I had a lot of bad trips that I didn't understand really about. I wasn't very emotionally adept. You could say, yeah, I was unbalanced. So my first trips were scary about letting go. You lose your sense of self. A lot of times, the science now talks about the default mode network, the part of ourself that is sort of our ego self, where we're looking for our various needs. That the dissolving of this ego, or this ego, the weakening of the ego, the moving to this larger perspective, people often interpret that as actually dying, that you're losing yourself. It feels like you're dying. So you need emotional support, and I didn't have it. So I had these really difficult trips, but I had read a lot about people learning from this, and I felt that I needed to keep on working through that. And so it's not that it's not a bad thing when something gets difficult, you know, but that took me a long time to learn. And so yes, I've had my share of bad trips, and I think that now I would say that I've had more. I would have a difficult trip, but the trips tend to be more oscillating. When you take psychedelics, you can have blissful, beautiful moments, and then you can remember something or have difficult moments about, you know, mortality or childhood memories or different kind of things, so that they alternate a lot. So that's this sort of flowing with it is the part, to not turn away from something that's different, not turn away from something that's blissful, but just let it keep flowing.
Okay, I think we'll open it up for questions now.
Thank you. I'm curious, Rick, where do things stand with your efforts at legalization of MDMA for therapeutic use? I know you got very close.
Yeah, so basically started MAPS in 1986. It took us 30 years through philanthropy, basically.
Excuse me, would you just tell us what MAPS stands for, please?
Yeah, so I needed to start a nonprofit in 1986, and I knew it wanted to have a P in it for psychedelic. So, you know, it had to be like a flag, you know, this is about psychedelics. The same way gay and queer have been reclaimed in a way. So then I had to figure out what other letters or words I would come for the nonprofit. So Stanislav Grof, who I've studied with, the world's leading LSD researcher, one of the founders of transpersonal psychology, he talked about the cartography of the unconscious. And Ralph Metzner, who was here at Harvard with Leary and Richard Alpert, who later became Ram Dass, Ralph wrote a book called Maps of Consciousness. So I thought, okay, maps, it's about helping us go to a new place, so that was the P. So M became multidisciplinary, looking at it from all different ways. Association, it's a group. So multidisciplinary association for psychedelic, and then S became studies for science. So MAPS is Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. Yeah.
But to this person's question, though, what's next?
Yes. So what happened was it took 30 years from 1986 to 2016 to have what's called the end of phase 2 meeting with FDA. That's where you say, we've learned all that we need to know about doses, about safety, about which are patients, and we want to move to phase 3. So we got permission then to move to phase 3. Then we spent 8 months negotiating with the FDA about the design of phase 3, every aspects of it. It's very difficult to do a double-blind study with psychedelics. So if, for example, one day in the future, each of you had a pill under the chair, and half of them were psychedelics and half were placebo, you know, we would probably be almost 100% sure by the end of the evening who had what. So it's very difficult to do a double-blind study. So we negotiated that with FDA. Then 2018, we started doing the phase 3 studies. And then the people we negotiated these designs with at the FDA left. New, more conservative people came in. And so August of last year, the FDA rejected the new drug application from the pharmaceutical company that we had started. They didn't actually say no, they just said not yet. So I realized, though, that I needed to bring in new investors. Now we needed all sorts of more money. I wasn't able to do it all through philanthropy. We raised about $160 million in donations. But now there's all of these for-profit psychedelic companies. They've raised, actually, since 2000, $5 billion has gone into the for-profit psychedelic companies. Right. So what has happened now is that 2 new investors, Antonio Gracias and Sir Christopher Hahn, have taken over the pharma company. They've invested from their funds, not from their, they've invested from their foundations, not from their funds, and they are in negotiations with FDA about what else the FDA wants to see. And so what we have now is RFK Jr. is the head of HHS. He's strongly pro-psychedelic. I spent 2 hours at Burning Man with his son, who had problems with addiction and got better with psychedelics. So RFK knows from his family somebody has benefited tremendously from psychedelics where other things didn't help. Jim O'Neill is the number 2 person in HHS. He's also very supportive of psychedelics. Marty McCarry, who's the head of the FDA, is supportive of psychedelic research. He said it's a top priority. RFK Jr. has said he wants to see approvals within the next 12 months of some kind. So what I think is going to happen is that there will be additional research will be required to get MDMA-assisted therapy fully approved for PTSD, but I believe that within the next 6 to 8 months, there'll be some sort of provisional approval to provide access, particularly to veterans and others in major medical centers. So I can't say this for sure. Now, the pharma company is off on its own. It's run by the investors. The nonprofit is no longer controlling it. But we're all very hopeful that there will be. Now, meanwhile, psilocybin is being studied for treatment-resistant depression and for major depressive disorder. Those are near the end of phase 3 studies. 5-MeO-DMT, which is the toad, you may have heard about this. It's the most powerful psychedelic we know. It's about 15 minutes to smoke it, but it's just like you're totally blasted beyond your sense of self into this, they call it the God molecule in some ways. It's being used, though, by a pharma company for the treatment of depression. You could think about ECT as kind of changing the patterns. These psychedelics change the pattern. So my feeling is that over the next year, there'll be some kind of progress, I believe, with MDMA. There's incredible research, like the most important research I think going on right now is in Israel. It's a direct comparison of individual versus group therapy. So group therapy is going to be the key to scaling, the key to reducing the cost. We hope it can be as good as individual therapy. We don't know. We'll find that out. But I think over the next 2 to 3 years, there'll be approvals for MDMA, for psilocybin, for 5-MeO-DMT. These are all called breakthrough therapies designated by the FDA. So I think that the rejection that took place in August, MAPS was the first. We were the first to get there. And what happened was that I had lost control of the pharma company, and it was, as we took in investors, and it was run by traditional pharma people. And so I think when you're doing something innovative, you can't always use traditional methods. And you have to be constantly educating the FDA. The FDA has never done this before either. And so Tom Insel, who used to be the head of NIMH, said that the real innovation of MAPS was not looking at therapeutic use of MDMA. It was combining MDMA with therapy. And the FDA just wasn't used to that. I mean, there's no other drug that's approved by the FDA. Ketamine, which you may have heard of, Spravato, for the treatment of depression, it was approved by Johnson & Johnson without any therapy at all. So I think the news is that things are moving forward. It works very, very well. There's a major unmet medical need. Under supervision, it can be done in a safe way. So I think that we will have psychedelic clinics of the future. The goal is to have therapists cross-trained with
Excuse me,
MDMA.
may I just interrupt you for 1 second? Can we go on to another question, possibly? Okay.
I had a family member who was suffering greatly from alcoholism, at times consuming a bottle of vodka a day, and we connected this family member to a therapeutic session of psilocybin. And yeah, sorry, like it's very emotional because this person got better after attending rehab, after costly rehab interventions, which were not successful. And during the session, he said, I felt the pain that I was inflicting on others. due to my alcohol intake. And that was really powerful. Inspired me to, now I'm in social work school. And I'm curious, like, I love this phrase that MAPS uses, be the bridge or build the bridge. So what bridges do you envision in the coming years between social work and nursing schools innovating these public health interventions? Sorry, I'm so nervous.
It's a great question. So actually one of the key issues is going to be training enough therapists, and then also making it so that it's affordable. So one of our major donors, Joe and Sandy Sandberg, have created an educational program specifically for nurses and social workers to train them to be co-therapists with psychedelic therapy. So that's going to be one of the major bridges right now. And it's in multiple different universities. Many social work schools and nursing schools are now starting to have little modules on psychedelics. It will really accelerate once FDA says yes to MDMA and psilocybin. But I think this kind of education of people about how to help people who have various indications, and to how to really help them. So that's going to be one of the biggest bridges. I'd say that the next bridge that we need to make is going to be with the insurance companies, and really to try to get it covered by insurance. One of Timothy Leary's statements that I really resonated with is he said that if you want to be a bridge, you have to get used to being stepped on. Because you get people on both sides who are like, why are you talking to the people on the other side of this divide? So I do think that beyond social workers and nurses is this idea of peer support. How do we help each other? The scale and the magnitude of the mental health crises are so great, and the number of people that are suffering from depression, particularly the younger people, we don't have enough therapists or psychiatrists or nurses or social workers. So that's where groups, and I just want to comment before about the humanitarian work that we heard about earlier this evening, is that what MAPS is doing, the nonprofit, now that the for-profit is on its own, is going to be going through the FDA, is we're working in global humanitarian projects. So we have a project in Lebanon. We just had a meeting with the Lebanese Ministry of Health today. And we have a donor that's supporting us to bring MDMA to Lebanon. We're trying to do work in Rwanda, in Somaliland, in the West Bank. We have Palestinian therapists that we've trained. So in these kind of contexts, particularly where you have refugees that are traumatized as a family, I think we will be needing to explore how do we treat people in groups, treat people in families, and like in Rwanda, there's hardly any doctors or therapists or psychiatrists. So who are the local healers? That's going to be one of the big things. And I think midwives, nurses will be one of the main service providers going forward for psychedelic therapy.
Actually, I have a follow-up question to that. You talk about group therapy. Would the idea be that people would be doing psychedelics together in a group?
Yeah.
Has that been attempted so far?
Well, yeah. So the Portland, Oregon VA was the first group therapy project. But before I'll say about that, let me just say that the Native American church that uses peyote in groups, often for alcoholism, that Bill W., who started AA in the 50s, did LSD and said LSD has a role to play in AA. In AA, they talk about hitting bottom, but then you've destroyed your health, destroyed your family, you lost your job. You can precipitate the hitting bottom with the LSD, where you get into the emotional issues. So I think this concept really of how do we support each other in groups. So the Native American church does peyote in groups. The ayahuasca churches, they do it in groups. But the first real scientific study in therapeutic use was at the Portland, Oregon VA. And these are groups of 4 therapists for 6 veterans with PTSD. And this was an individual session first and then a group session. And they did 2 cohorts, and then I've changed it. It's an individual session and then 2 group sessions. In Israel, they're doing work with what's called moral injury. PTSD and moral injury. That's where a lot of the Iraq and Afghanistan veterans have moral injury. Why did they do this? It's worse off than before. And also, sometimes in war you do things that conflict with your morals. So there was a project in Israel, which is also groups, that was going to be 2 individual sessions and then 1 group. And now they'd like to change that to 1 individual and 2 groups. The big study I'm talking about in Israel is direct comparison of individual versus group, 3 individual versus 3 group. So the fellow that was the fundraiser that I mentioned for MAPS that worked out the grief on the dance floor with ecstasy for all the AIDS people that were dying. So that is an early kind of group therapy in a sense. It's both celebration and processing. So I think that we will find a lot of, we'll see. But my personal view is that individual therapy goes deeper, but when you have the group support and the group integration after, because it's not really about the drug, it's at the context, and it's not even that much about the drug experience, it's about the integration afterwards. What do you bring back to change your baseline? The fundamental difference between psychedelics and traditional psychiatric medicines is that traditional psychiatric medicines control symptoms and they're meant to be taken on a daily basis, often for your life. The goal with psychedelic therapy is to do a few deep interventions. Our MDMA sessions are 8 hours long. So just think about how different that is from a 1-hour therapy session once a week. We have an 8-hour long therapy session for 1 person with usually a male-female therapy team. So I think that the individual sessions will go deeper, but I think that the group, with the group integration process, will make up for that. So I think the field is likely to go, and the insurance companies are likely to move in the direction of group therapy.
Okay, Will is giving us the signal that I think our time is up, so thank you very much. It was a great conversation.
I just want to keep you guys for one more moment. Am I using this well enough? Thank you. I'm Sarah Caputo. I'm chair of the Belmont Voice board, and I just want to keep you for one last minute to say thank you. I've learned a ton tonight, mostly from Linda. I learned that I need to set my intentions, and then from Rick, I learned that I need to rip them up. So I have a lot to take home with me tonight. And I'm also, this is not a learning, but so gratified to be part of a Belmont community where people want to get together and talk about ideas and learn from each other and be in community together. It feels really great, and I'm so thankful to the people, Will, Prashant, all of our speakers and interviewers who made this happen. So thank you so much to everybody who did this. And thank you to all of you who participated in this experiment with us. This is the first time the Belmont Voice has gone beyond our website and our print paper to think about how else can we connect this community, how else can we bring people together, talk about ideas. And really, the paper has been an experiment from the beginning. We sat around thinking about, can we really produce a paper? Can we staff it with professional journalists? Can we really mail it for free to all 1,100 homes and businesses? And so far, it's been so gratifying that the answer has been yes, and we've done it only with the support of the people in this room and the people in the whole community. So if I can ask for your continued support, we would deeply appreciate it. I think most people here probably know that we are a nonprofit, and this year, we still need $110,000 to hit our fundraising goal by the end of the year. That's very doable for this community if everybody who cares about the Belmont Voice does what they can in support of it. So when you go home tonight, please think about, is there something that you could do philanthropically for the Belmont Voice? We would be very appreciative, and in return, we will keep publishing this paper, and we will keep experimenting with other forums and other ways to bring the community together for learning and communicating. And secondly, my second request for everybody is we have some cards and pens near the door. If you would take a minute to give us some feedback on how this went, would you like to see us continue this kind of thing? How's the paper going? What's your feedback? Anything you'd like to share with us, we would really appreciate hearing your feedback and your thoughts on how things are going. So that's it. Thank you very much. Really appreciate you being here.